Good morning. I'm Malcolm Graham Wood, and I'm welcome to my CEO interview on Core Finance. My guest today is Edward Dawson of Prospex Energy. In fact, he's CEO and Managing Director. Nice to see you again, Edward. How are you going?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a couple of years, but good to
Yeah, great. You've been doing a lot. I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to tell us. But for those who might find it reasonably new to them, would you mind giving us a quick overview of Prospex portfolio and strategy?
Yeah. So we're a AIM investment company focusing on energy. We have today two core projects, one in Italy, one in Spain. We're investing in the transition fuel. We're looking. We've got gas projects. We think the transition, is going to be important, but we all know the reality is it's not all going to happen tomorrow. We do need hydrocarbons, and we want to be at the clean end of the business. So we're happily focused on gas. And in Spain, we have a power station that produces electricity from gas fields it sits on. So what we're looking to do is leverage off the existing acreage that we have, both in Italy. We have a project called Selva that was going to be on production hopefully this year. It was drilled in 2018. It's going to have very strong for us flow rates and cash flow generation. And our power station, the El Romeral project in Spain, again has a number. I think there's 11 prospects that are in time to be drilled up. So we've entered both these projects with a view to an initial step up, but then there's organic growth in there.
Excellent. So let's just take those two in a bit more detail. The El Romeral is, as I understand it, an integrated gas production and power station in southern Spain. So you've got you're finding the gas, you're producing it, and you're distributing that into the grid, I imagine. Tell us a bit more detail about how that works.
Yeah. So for listeners or viewers who have been to that part of the world, it's just outside Seville. Chevron was sort of first there in the 80s and drilled a number of wells. And so the basin outside Seville is quite prolific. It's biogenic, shallow gas. And we've managed to pick up the El Romeral project, which was owned by Naturgy. Naturgy being one of the largest utilities in Europe and Spanish largest utility, used to be known as Gas Natural and things like that. So today there's 3 wells producing. They're mature wells, and the power station is utilization rates around 22%. So there is 11 more prospects. They've been well defined on seismic for many years, but to say Naturgy didn't take them forward. In fact, they brought up the whole basin through a number of transactions. Ultimately, their intention, I think, was to do gas storage, but we're not particularly interested in that. We want to. First stage is obviously we've taken control of the power station now, and that we want to, operate it in a sensible, fashion going forward. So there's been a steep learning curve for the local company to go from a non-operating exploration company to operating and running a power station. But over time, we wish to, drill up these 11 prospects. What does that mean for us? We think the first well, if not the second well, will get the utilization of the power station back up to 100%. And then we've got a number of options. Do we just keep the power station topped up? Do we increase the capacity of the power station? There's plenty of space. But also, we are actually within 100 meters at one stage of our pipeline. the local pipeline within the national pipeline, so we could export gas that way, or even take it into the local town where there is currently an export-import into the national grid. So whilst we've taken control of the power station, we don't want to stop there. That's the first stage, but then take on these 11 prospects. They are described in the CPR as very low risk. They're talking sort of 70% chance of success. That is not quite unheard of in our industry, but it's clear from the history. The 7 wells have been drilled on this seismic data set. 5 went onto production, and 2 are discoveries yet to be put on development. So it's a very low risk project, but it generates good cash. Can do.
Yeah. I think I'll come back to Italy in a minute, because actually I'd like to stick on Spain there for the time being, because you recently announced a raise of £750,000 at 1.5p with some warrants attached. That obviously went down very well. It went down well in the marketplace, but in particular, I read in your report that you were operating at 22% of capacity, and you mentioned there that there's well options. Just to firm up, in terms of the power station, the plant, is that running at 22% of capacity and needs work on it, or is it just the gas that you need to provide for it?
The limiting factor is basically it's the gas being supplied from the 3 wells. They're mature production. So we switch between 2 engines at the moment. So we're able to do work on one or whatever maintenance. So we switch. We regularly switch between 2 engines to keep the number of hours on the engines the same. The 3rd engine is not operational today. There will be a small amount of work to bring it back up to sort of full operating capacity, but we don't operate that today.
And in that note, it said that if you went up from the 22% capacity to 100, you'd be getting annual revenues of something like €4 million. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How does that make the profit and loss account look?
Well, it's good. I mean, it's basically, it's operationally geared as a business. So, I could see half of that revenue is turning into profit after tax. So, it's based on average prices anyway. I mean, we've had a fairly odd year, but on prices, but normality seems to be returning to the market.
And I'll catch you there on prices as well, if I may, because I've got that later on, but we'll come to that. So how do prices work? You said that you get distribution locally. How does the pricing system work within the European grid?
So we sell electricity into the Spanish grid. We don't have any long-term contracts, so it's the classic local. Well, the Spanish market works on the day ahead, and it basically builds a book in reverse. So a nuclear power station, which you can't switch it on and off, will go, I want to produce tomorrow, so I will, I'm happy to produce and receive nothing for it. But actually, the price, everyone gets the same price in the market hour. So there will be a number of swing producers who have to get €50 per megawatt hour or something like that. So we've seen, on average, prices this year to date around 50. We've seen them as high as 80, 85. People may have seen in the news there was a very cold spell in January when there was.
That's euros per therm, I guess.
No, it works in megawatt hours.
Right, because
Yeah.
it's not almost the same as pen. Yeah,
Yeah, it's similar, but
yeah.
it's so. I haven't looked at the weather forecast today. I mean, we're below average today in Spain. But again, you can see the effects of wind and you can see the effects of solar.
Brilliant. Good. Well, sorry to take you off the straight and narrow there, but
subject.
Yeah. So let's get back to Italy, just as well. I was talking about the portfolio for those people doing it. Exciting moment. You've got the first gas at Selva coming up later this year. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So Selva's, I think it's an interesting project. So the original Selva gas field, it sits in the Po Valley, was produced by Eni until the 80s. We farmed in the modern era to the acreage, and a well was drilled into the attic of the old gas field.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, we had production flow rates, test rates that dramatically exceeds what I think we were expecting, which was great. And we've got higher pressures in two sands, which is good. We have been working since 2018 to get it on production. It's effectively ready to go. It's gone through the local, regional, and sort of various national committees to do that. So we are now waiting the final bit of sign off for the environmental ministry.
Why does that not surprise me?
Well, the good thing is the minister takes advice from a technical committee, and in fact that technical committee we know has met and approved it. In fact, we know from the beginning of the year that's the case. But the Italian government fell effectively in January. But we now have a new government, which is good. It's a wider coalition. There's less influence by the Five-Star Movement. And we now have 1/3 of the cabinet positions are technocrats. It's Super Mario who saved the ECB. So we've got good hope in that. And importantly, the environmental ministry is now being run by a technocrat. And its fellow technocrats have ticked the boxes and said this is good to go.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're nearly there. I mean, I've been in and out. I mean, I remember years back with Enterprise Oil and Eni, but sort of we've talked about this, and obviously, that you're not planning to do anything else in Italy, presumably. Once you got this underway, this will just be some good cash flow for you, and what can sometimes be quite...
We are to the certain extent that in the production concession, there were a number of other opportunities. And once it's a production concession, yes, we will have to get a well permitted, but it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
And then once we hope we make another discovery, and the chances of that again are pretty good, because as I said at the start, Selva was an existing gas field. We have some contingent resources on what we now know is called Selva North and Selva South. They are targeting the A and B sands. The Selva itself is the C sands. Again, sands that have produced. We're going, up dipping into the attic. So we're pretty confident about that in time. But what I really like is East Selva, which is a prospective resources in the high 30s BCF. So double what we've got at Selva. But it's clear, it's further along the structure. There was not a huge amount of seismic over it, but it's clearly there on some seismic. Yeah. So there was,
Yeah.
it's not just a one hit. Let's, that's it. Good cash flow. I mean, the cash flow is good. And, we'll be able to use that cash to deploy elsewhere over the portfolio.
Excellent. Well, we're doing well here. We're not quite out of time, but nearly. I wanted to talk about, you've obviously made a real point, particularly with disposals and so on, that you've made yourself this portfolio of gas and power projects, which are particularly well positioned, as you call it, for the transition for gas to be the fuel of the future and so on. Do you find yourself with it looking at anything else apart from these two projects at the moment, or are you just going to sort of settle down and expand at Selva and do the necessary at El Romero?
We are looking at one or two things, but I mean, what we'd like to do is we see plenty of what I would call organic growth in the portfolio. There's opportunities there. And it's important that we don't take focus off that. But if we saw similar opportunities, maybe in the neighborhood of where we already are, why not use the expertise that we've got to do something?
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. What I'd like to do now that we're almost at the end is to conclude by asking you to sort of put everything together that we've had a chat about and say, where would you see Prospex in 12 to 18 months' time? You've raised money, you've given us an idea of, of where you're going. How would you see it in 12 to 18 months' time, Edward?
Well, I really hope it would be on a different foot, in the sort of sense that, we talked about having a fair wind. Yes, we need to put some capital into Italy. But we think that can be done by non-equity means. I won't expand on that now. But then once Italy's on production, G&A is well covered multiple times. And as I say, we will then have cash to deploy through the portfolio. Taba, the Spanish company, has been very much focused on the El Romero project and moving from non-operating to actually have an operation in the power station. But again, very soon we will be Taba will be submitting applications to move the portfolio along, and with you to bring up those great opportunities. So certainly on a different foot and moving things forward, be good.
Sounds absolutely great, Edward. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure to see you again, and I think the story Prospex looks really fascinating, and I'd like to thank you for being my guest today. It's been Malcolm Graham Wood doing my CEO interview on Core Finance. My guest has been Edward Dawson of Prospex Energy. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Edward, as well. Bye now.
Cheerio.